Hey guys, welcome to another video. I have, excitement, all those things that I say first, super much excitement today. So I have been saving up for and wanting to get this Sennelier set for quite some time, and it came with 100 tubes of paint and this size 4 Raphael Kolinsky sable brush. I say 100 tubes, but it's actually only 97 colors because there are a couple duplicates because Sennelier uses this 100 tube set for a couple other things, and there's one color, Opera Rose, that's no longer available, so you get these 3 duplicate tubes of other colors. Okay, so now that we've covered that, let's talk about my plans for these paints. I got myself a bunch of half pans and full pans, and of course couldn't wait to test out a couple of them, so I put a couple colors in full pans yesterday, and I knew that I wanted to make a palette. So the first thing I did was to pull out the colors that I knew I was going to want to have full pans of. I wasn't necessarily trying to balance out primary colors or make a concise palette with just these colors. I just went through and said, I really enjoy these particular colors and I would like to have them in larger quantities. My original thought was that I would write the number and name of the color on all of the pans, which I was prepared to do, but then of course like a dozen pans in discovered that the marker I was using just rubs off, and I didn't have the patience to find one that would work, so I just made a chart in my sketchbook so I would know where everything was and stopped worrying about it then. As you can see, these are the full pans, and they don't all have the exact same consistency, which is normal for watercolors. Depending on what pigment was used, some of them are super creamy and are a lot thinner and it lays really nice and flat, and some of them are a bit thicker and chunkier, and I think we need to see this in reverse. Because we all know what paint looks like coming out of a tube, but going back into the tube, that is fascinating. Anyway, some of these colors, like this quinacridone gold, I love how nice and smooth these colors lay in the palette. Like, it was just smoothing out and I didn't even have to touch it. I didn't have to hold the pan, and down it goes. Oh, that's so satisfying. So once I had all of the colors that I knew I wanted in full pans, I organized all of them, put them in the order that I wanted, and I adhered them down to this tray that I was using, and that was pretty much it. One of the main reasons I wanted to make a palette like this was I didn't want to just buy an empty tin palette. One, because it's really basically impossible to find a metal tin palette that can hold 97 colors, which is kind of insane. So, or 96 colors. So I knew that I was going to have to kind of make my own thing if I wanted to have all of these colors together. So once I had all of my full pans set and had all of my half pans in place, the only thing left to do was to fill them up. So I kind of thought a lot about the layout that I wanted for these paints, and I ended up going with warm colors on one side, cool colors on the other side, and the earth tones in the middle, basically. There's a little bit of variance, but it was really interesting because in my brain there were specific rules that you had to follow for how a watercolor palette is laid out, but that's not really true. Oh, and this is what I was doing when the colors would separate from the binder, like when the pigment separated. When I poured it into the pan, you can just use a toothpick to mix that up and just give it a good stir for like 30 seconds or so, and it will dry a lot better with the pigment together. Sometimes it separates again, but this is definitely really, really helpful in keeping all of the paint and the binder together. So after I had put in one side, it's really interesting because I thought I knew what I was doing, but then the more you go, the more you learn about how to put the paint into the pans, and it was super fun and super enjoyable. And you may or may not be able to tell, but at this point they weren't even like attached to the palette. And this is what I was using. It's actually an old box that my kids got toys in a while ago, like train tracks or something like that. And I just put hinges on one side. I was gonna put like a little lock thing on the other end, but I ended up just doing like a sort of hook and loop Velcro sort of sticky pads so it does close shut. I have these double-sided adhesive thingies. Oh, look at Oh no, this one was so liquidy. This is that one that I actually mixed up, that I showed you that I mixed with a toothpick. It was so liquidy, it just like dumped right out when I tried to put the sticky thing on the bottom. Oh my goodness, so be careful. Anyway, colors going back in a thing with a thing in it with a thingy thing. So what was actually more helpful there than the chart was the picture that I took of the palette, so that when I was putting them back in, I actually had all of that laid out. All right, I'm gonna swatch some colors. Oh my goodness, I feel like there's so much to talk about and so just not enough time. All right, so swatching colors, I want to talk about these paints. These are, I can't believe it's 6 minutes in. These are Sennelier watercolors. They are a French-made watercolor brand paint. Anyway, they're French watercolors, and what makes these different from other brands of watercolors, two things in particular that I know of. One is that they're actually made with a fair amount of honey, and the honey is used not only as a preservative for the paints, but it also gives this really nice shine and luminescence to the paints themselves. And the other thing that is kind of hard to see when you're just looking at these paints on their own, but you can tell a lot when you compare them to other brands, in a single layer, these paints actually aren't super vibrant. In just one layer of paint, they're kind of subdued and not really in your face. The colors are not super bright, which might be a little disappointing to some people, but the reason that they're not so bright in a single layer is that these paints are actually meant to be layered. And of course, when you have transparent watercolors, that's what they always want. But the Sennelier paints in particular do really, really well with glazing. Because the paints are so transparent and luminescent, the more you layer them, the more vibrant those colors become. And I'm going to be doing a full review of these paints in the future once I've had some more time to kind of test them out and play around with them. But I definitely wanted to get my palette put together and swatch out all of these colors. I at first did not want to take the time to make all of these charts and put all, because it took me like 2 days to do this whole process. I didn't really want to do it all at first. I wanted to just get the paints out, throw them in pans, and start painting right away. But I knew that having a better idea of what colors I actually had, not only having a reference for the future, but also just seeing the colors coming out of pans and knowing what they look like, knowing what I was working with, and becoming a bit more familiar with the consistency and the flow of the paint, I knew that that was going to be really, really important. So I'm glad that I took the time to do this step. And for this whole process, I did use the brush that came with the set. And at first I was thinking that a size 4 brush would be something on the smaller side, and I wasn't sure how often I would use it, but the size is actually almost exactly the same as the size 6 synthetic brush that I have by Princeton. And a big part of the reason they're so similar is because this is natural fiber, the hair, the bristles. It holds so much more water even than my larger synthetic brush, and it's just really nice to use. The natural point and taper of the fibers feels more organic and not just like all the bits, all the hairs are trimmed to make a point. It just feels like a much more, I don't know, luxurious experience, I guess I would say. So the way I divided up these sheets was I had 4 sheets of paper, and I'm just using Canson watercolor paper, and I divided them up into 25 squares per sheet and put the color number and name on the side, and the black strip that you see across the top there was actually just for me to have a reference for transparency of the colors. So I wanted to kind of see how much of that line you can see through after you've painted the color on, just to kind of gauge the transparency. And I really enjoyed leaving the bottom corner of these squares to allow the color to flow a bit. You can see by leaving that bit wet first and then touching it to the more pigmented areas, I was able to get a better judge of how these colors would flow naturally instead of just pushing them around myself. It's really interesting because when I put the colors in the palette, it somehow looks like way less than 96 colors when they're all together. I know I showed some people my palette when it was done and they're like, that's all of them? But yeah, it looks like so much more in that giant box that they come in, and so much less when they're in the palette. But it's really nice because the palette is much more of a manageable size, the one that I made, and it's much easier to work with, which I'm really, really happy about. So let's talk a little bit about where I got these paints. I live in the US, so I was looking on Amazon, and Sennelier does sell watercolors on Amazon, but I was looking at their 48 color set at the time, and it was actually the same price that I found this 100 tube set for on Jackson's. So Jackson Art Supplies is an art supplies store. They also sell art supplies online, and they're actually based out of the UK. So it meant international shipping for me, which I was a little bit nervous about, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that, but it was like half the price, even with shipping, to get them, and I even chose the expedited shipping because I was impatient and really wanted these paints. And even with shipping, it was like half the price compared to what I would have paid if I had tried to get them on Amazon. So when I saw that this was a better price, I waited until the new year. That's what I told myself. I had some goals I wanted to reach, and told myself that if I reached those goals by the end of the year, then I would get these paints. And I did. So I was really, really excited. And I think that this blue page, this first couple of rows of this blue page, is like my favorite. It reminds me so much of like cloudy skies, and it's just very calm and beautiful, and the greens are nice in it too, but those first two rows, especially of blue, I just absolutely love that. So of course, this set comes with more colors than any one person would need in a palette at one time, and I totally understand that. I'm definitely not looking to be a collector of watercolors. I don't really want to have every single color of every single brand, but I do really enjoy trying out different brands of watercolors when I can. And part of the reason for that is, okay, look at this green earth. Look at this color. I swear I put it on there. It's just so light. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, right, brands. I do like to try out different brands of watercolors, and one of the biggest reasons for that is just they can be so different from each other. It's actually really surprising. You would think that watercolors are watercolors and they would all kind of act the same, but depending on where the watercolors are from and how they're made, what that process is, the kind of binders and pigments that they use, it can really affect the way that you use the watercolors, how opaque or transparent they are. It's just really fascinating for me to see how different one brand can be from another brand, and that's just really, really interesting. So I'm always excited to try new brands when I can. If I had to pick a very favorite page, I don't know, of this swatching section, of course I really love those blues, and I'm hard torn between the blues and these earth tones. Earth tones are like always my favorite, especially these ochres and the grays. I love the more muted tones. It's really, really fascinating. And of course, like I said, you could do just as much with just 12 basic colors. Most of these colors, I shouldn't say most of them, some of them are made up of more than one pigment anyway, so oftentimes in a tube you might have a color that's a blue pigment mixed with a green pigment, and instead of buying that tube of two pigments, you could just have the two separate tubes and mix them whenever you wanted to. So technically, no, you don't need all of these colors, but I find it to be really inspiring when you have a lot of colors in front of you to look at and to choose from. Sometimes that can be really helpful for me in creating color palettes, when I can look at a swatch sheet and go, I want this color and this color and this color. And it gives me a lot more variety, and seeing them all laid out in the palette in front of me, like I said, I just find that to be very, very inspiring. And I cannot wait to start painting with these. It's crazy because I feel like I've had them it's been a few days now. I just got them earlier this week, and I still haven't gotten to like paint a painting with them, but that's okay because I've been taking my time to put all of this stuff together and not rush swatching them and building the palette. I wanted that to be as efficient as possible. So I know that I have my colors all swatched out. My pans are in the box. As far as mixing goes, I did decide that I wanted some small porcelain mixing trays. I really love mixing watercolors in porcelain dishes, so I found some on Blick Art Supplies, their website, and I bought 5 of them with a lid, and by the time I actually got this palette and put everything together, there were actually only 3 left surviving because 2 of them and the lid fell off of my art table and shattered into lots of tiny little pieces, and it was very sad. But you will see those, hopefully. Did I show them? Oh my goodness, I hope I did. Anyway, here's swatches, here's colors. Colors are nice. Hopefully I'll show you those little trays. If not, you will have seen them in my previous video. Mixing watercolors in little porcelain trays is actually just really satisfying. The color doesn't separate as much as it does on plastic or as it can on metal. So let's take one more look at this box here. Here you can see all my paints are all laid out, and that big spot where I spilled all of that red paint, I don't even remember what color it was, but there it is. Here are my little mixing trays and my brush and my swatches. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this slightly longer than normal video. I had a lot of fun working on this, and I cannot wait to show you next week's painting that will be with these paints. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week. Bye!